want to preface this next discussion I want to have here with 2 points. The first is I have a friend who lives out in rural Minnesota. And he was actually telling me, he's doing well with business. He works in landscaping and gardening and stuff. And he says, well, I've got, some pretty big contracts, of lawn care for some of the wealthiest farmers in the area where he lives. And these are the big farmers that basically bought up other people. And I said, wow, so and you go past their house. Have you ever driven out in rural America? You drive past a farm where it's got the front gate and it's manicured and there's an idyllic farmhouse and then the idyllic barn out there. It's perfect for proposing for photo ops when it's time for your Christmas card. But the reality is it's not practical. They run, it's a corporation basically that's, disguised as a farm. He says, oh, yeah, they're basically, the people are hardly there. And this is his exact words. He said, the people that own these places are hardly there, but they want to make it look like there's people there all the time. So not only does he do yard work and, trim and stuff like this, but he also makes sure the lights are working and all these things. These are extras that he gets paid for to make it look like, make it look like if there's a storm, their leaves, they're clearing out the driveway, stuff like that. So it looks like there's people living there all the time. He says, oh, these people haven't lived here for years. Really? Oh, yeah. They left a long time ago because the quality of life in rural communities had been deteriorating. And so they spend, even though they still own the place and they're out there, especially, and they do come on out for planting season and harvest time. But for the most part, they're not there. They live in one of the major cities, whether it's Minneapolis, St. Paul, or over to Sioux Falls, or they might go up to Fargo, but that's where they live. So their kids can get and their kids go to private school out there. And so the kids are hardly ever there on the farm anymore. It's not the idyllic world where you think about Ma and Pa and the kids on the farm and there's biscuits and a pie, bacon, while Grandpa's working on the tractor sort of thing. No, that doesn't exist anymore. And he even said he knows a lot about technology. And he was the first guy that suggested to me, probably within 30, 40 years, when farms really become automated, that the quote unquote farmers that own the farms won't even live on the farmland, that they'll be in high-rise apartment buildings in Chicago and in Minneapolis and run everything automated. And they'll have a few farm hands on the side, on the ground to take care of breakdowns and stuff like this. But they're going to sit there and talk about, I'm a farmer, and they're going to live on the 37th floor of a skyrise apartment building. So that's just kind of the way things are. I bring that point up because, and I'll say, I'm going to get to this because the finances is the main goal. And that this plays a big role in this. I have a personal connection to rural healthcare. My great-grandfather, my grandmother on my father's side's dad, was a guy named Charles Bielenant. And Charles Bielenant, he initially went to northern Minnesota. He graduated medical school here, I think, in the state of Minnesota, if I'm not mistaken. And he went out, and this is back in the day when the lumber companies were the only people in northern Minnesota. And he got a contract to be the doctor for the lumber companies, which was really cool. He had a self-driving train car that was his medical, unit that had, an examination room. And if he had to do an operation or something, he could do it in there, all the stuff that he needed. And he would drive it out these train tracks that went out to the lumber camps, and he'd go visit every camp and you would see them. And he could basically go up and down the tracks when he needed to. And yeah, kind of a slick deal. When they lumbered out northern Minnesota, he then became kind of transferred from the lumber industry to the mining industry, became the official doctor for some of the mines, and eventually kind of as healthcare evolved out there, stopped being so much of a company position. It became more of a community position. And if you're from Virginia, Minnesota, if you've been there for a long time, there was the Charles Bielenant Clinic up there for many years. And he was the guy that started the hospital in Virginia which is a regional area. So it's something for me. There's a tremendous amount of pride I have in family members that went out into the rural parts of this country and brought medicine and hope for the people that were out there. Because if not for that, I mean, if you don't know where Virginia, Minnesota is, it's up on the Iron Range. Duluth, maybe Hibbing, but probably Duluth would have been your nearest medical doctor. And back in those days, that was probably a 2.5 to 3 hour drive if the roads even existed. Probably had to jump on a train. Hope, put pressure on that until you get there. Be careful with that. The true legacy. Here's my main point. Those are the two things I wanted to get out because this does matter to me. The true legacy of Republicans controlling rural America is that we have watched rural health care get annihilated by Republican policies. And it might not be direct, but I will say this, they're sitting and watching all their hospitals close or pull back service. And they're out there constantly worrying about, if you're living in these towns, if my pregnant wife goes into labor, I can't, unless it's an emergency situation, I have to drive. Hopefully she, doesn't start giving birth as I have the 45-minute to an hour drive to the nearest hospital that has a maternity ward in it. You have a serious problem. I mean, the days of you having a specialized clinic locally are pretty much gone. You might have a small cancer treatment facility, but for the most part, most people are having to go to the larger cities now. You don't have the medical establishment like you used to have in rural America. I brought this up because there's another hospital here that basically is getting rid of its inpatient facility. That basically it's only going to become an emergency care facility. They're not going to even have an ability that if you need to stay for a few days, if you have an emergency, they're going to have to airlift you or drive you by ambulance to a larger metro area. By the way, a little pricey on your medical insurance if you've got that. And the reality is this is an absolute mess. And then people have been, I posted this story this morning, and people have been sending me stories from across the upper Midwest of the same thing. This is one of them that came across. Eau Claire and Chippewa Falls hospitals are closed. State Wisconsin legislature had money to keep them open, but the Republicans refused to release the money. This is Eau Claire, Wisconsin. This is not necessary. We are starting to see this now hit the larger communities. Forget about the town of 4,000 to 5,000 people that might have at one point had a medical facility in it. Now you're seeing the towns of up to 100,000 people in them losing medical facilities, closing down specialty clinics, saying, if you want that, then you need to go to the city. And this is one of the reasons why the wealthy people in these rural communities, for the most part, they don't live in the rural communities because they don't have, they have the money to where they can live somewhere where there's actually competent and complete medical care. Now, why is this? Why is this happening? There's a lot of reasons why. All of them point to the Republicans. First, let's talk about something I have talked about multiple times, the absolutely annihilated economic structure of rural America, where back in, say, 1980, you would have in a small town, small metro area, 1,000 farmers making the equivalent of probably $75,000 a year, depending on the crop prices, where they came in, what their margins were. But you had a lot of farmers that were making money. Today, you don't have 1,000 of those guys. What you've got is probably 10 farmers who are owning all the other farms. You work what used to be your family's land, which is now their land, and you work that, and you get a paycheck. You might get some margins there, but the economic base that used to exist in rural America just doesn't exist there anymore. And those wealthy farmers, it's not like they're buying 20 jugs of milk when they go to the grocery store, even if they are living in the community where they basically own all the land. They're not buying 20 gallons of milk. No, they've run off the farmers. The farmers aren't even there anymore. And in small town after small town after small town, go out there. The only jobs available, you can work the gas station if you can get one of the jobs. They've got 20 resumes sitting right there, people wanting to go work the third shift at the Casey's General Store. Or they're working in the grocery store. Or they might be, if they're lucky, they might be serving at the diner if the town even still has one. No, the economic structure, the viability of rural America has been annihilated by Republicans who have embraced the corporate ag structure and basically do not really care to make sure that the quality of life in rural America is good. And sure, they all, why don't you want to move out here? Why don't you want to go out and bring your company out there? You might be able to. Some people do. But I've also talked about that as well, that they want you to come into town, but heaven forbid you're offering health care, because the other companies in town that are still there, we're not offering health care. And, we don't want you stealing our employees, so we'll shut you down before we let you come in here and offer paid family leave. What are you doing? A livable wage. Come on, man. I'm not Mr. Moneybags here. You need to pay what we're paying, so no one leaves my job to go to your company. And if you don't like that, you can get out and go back to your metro area. Okay, fine, I'll go back. Why don't people want to move here? So the economic structure is not there to sustain these hospitals anymore. I'll also point out the amount of times Republicans have vilified doctors and nurses, to where doctors and nurses, I know 2 nurses who are now in Minneapolis, St. Paul, who used to work in rural Minnesota, not the same town. Basically, both left because the whole COVID thing just broke them. To sit there and try to save people's lives, and they're like, you're part of the liberal agenda. You sit there and say, why don't we have hospitals and doctors? Why doesn't anyone work here? Well, have you tried being nice to them? No, not an option. Never forget. We'll never forget when COVID was going on, the South Dakota nurses, the ones that were over there talking about how they're saying, you need to say goodbye to your family and friends. You're dying. And they're like, this is a myth. And you're like, how is this even possible that these people could get brainwashed this bad? 5 feet higher on the Titanic. As I said earlier, 5 feet higher on the Titanic. Now, if I was a Republican and I represented a rural community and I saw that the local hospital was going to get rid of things, I would be calling in every favor I could at the state capitol to try to get a bill passed, to try to basically see if I could get some money out to these communities to help with hiring incentives, job incentives, military, medical initiatives to help basically give the services that these people need. And you know what you don't see Republicans doing? Any of that. They talk about tax breaks. Well, if you're making $40,000 a year, getting an extra, even if you would get anything from a Republican tax break, which at $40,000 a year, that tax break is not for you. But even if you did, what, $10? That doesn't help you. Might cover the gas one way to the nearest medical facility that's going to be able to take care of you or your family. No, the only thing they care about is tax breaks for the wealthy, who don't even live in these communities anymore. And you wonder why there are swaths of this country right now where it's an hour and a half to the nearest medical care.